So hi, I'm Sheila Rule. I'm Executive Director of the Think Outside the Cell Foundation, and I will be your moderator today. I thank you very much for joining us for what is a very important discussion. In 1989, a 28-year-old white female jogger in Central Park was raped, beaten, and left for dead. 5 black and Latino teenagers, 14 to 16 years old, were arrested. It became the biggest crime story in the country. The mayor at the time, Ed Koch, called it the crime of the century. Those 5 black and Latino teenagers were convicted of the crime and locked behind bars the following year. What far too few people know is that 13 years later, these young men were found not guilty and their convictions were overturned. Far too people know that they didn't beat or rape anyone, that the crime was nothing like the one depicted in the media and presented by the prosecution. Far too people know that anyone who really wanted to know the truth could have discovered it years earlier. Far too people know as well that this case has had far-reaching legal and social implications, and that all these years later, despite all of the evidence, New York City continues to actively fight a $250 million civil suit that the Central Park 5 and their families have filed, accusing the city, individual police officers, and prosecutors of violating their civil rights. While the crime, arrest, trial, and conviction of these young men created headlines around the world, all of the rest of it has created only a footnote. This workshop is intended to turn the spotlight on that footnote and to bring about true justice for the Central Park 5 and for all of us. I would like at this time to give a round of applause and an introduction to Senator Perkins, who's sponsoring this workshop.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be a part of this workshop, and I've been chosen to be the sponsor, but I just really think we ought to give a round of applause to Sheila and those panelists, especially Raymond and Roger, for being here and making this happen. And, you know, this is a great weekend, and it's a very, very important weekend, and I think this workshop, perhaps more than any other for me personally, and I'm sure for others as well, underscores the value of this caucus and this conference and the kind of work that is very, very important for us to be doing, not just on a weekend, but every week, every day that we're up here. So I want to say what really needs to be said as far as where the case is at. The time has come, the moment is now. For not the first time, we have heard a lengthy and detailed outline and enumeration of the particulars of the Central Park 5 case. These are a stark and distressing set of facts that you will be hearing throughout this workshop. However, there really is no more need to be said, except having been there with the 5 from the beginning, as a neighbor, as a friend, as a community activist, out to see that justice was done. I'm compelled to add, without further ado, it's past time that these men get paid. It's past time that these men get paid. No matter what the time is now, no matter the amount, it is not enough not to restore to these patient men the years, the living, and the trust they have lost. Justice delayed is still justice denied. This protracted outrage of justice remains and will remain an indelible stain on our city's record. It reminds us of the urgency of our struggle against racism, the stubborn and fundamental tendency that we still have to overcome in our city and in America. There are articles on the wall that I think give you some sense of the history of this case. These are articles that appeared in the various newspapers at the time. We also have before you on the 5th floor and the LOB outside of my office. The film that has recently been widely acclaimed that we encourage you to come up and see. It's been showing all day long. We've been very happy that the audiences that have come to enjoy it. And so this is going to be an opportunity for you to actually see in documentary way what has led us up to this day in terms of that particular film. I also want to take this moment to read a resolution number 4108 that was passed in May of 2010 regarding the Central Park Fire that I sponsored and was passed in the Senate, remembering and recognizing at that time the 21st anniversary of the tragic events and persons who were victims of what had come to be known as the, quote, Central Park jogger case. Whereas on April 19, 1989, a young white female jogging in Manhattan Central Park was raped and nearly beaten to death. And 5 young black and Latino children were arrested, tried, and jailed for years. And whereas the attack on the young woman gained international notoriety as the Central Park jogger case, and whereas there was no physical evidence which connected any of the youths with the crime, and whereas the 5 youths steadfastly maintained their innocence and said that alleged, quote, confessions taken from them by the police were improper, and whereas the 5 teens, Anton McCrae, aged 15, served 6 years. Kevin Richardson, aged 14, served 6.5 years. Yusef Salam, aged 15, served 6.5 years. Raymond Santana, aged 15, served 8 years. And Corey Wise, aged 16, served 11.5 years, spent their youth in prison. And whereas upon their release from prison, the 5 had to register as sex offenders. And whereas in 2002, the actual perpetrator, Matias Reyes, a convicted serial rapist and murderer, confessed to the crime, providing details of the attack which only the perpetrator could have known. And whereas Matias Reyes' DNA matched that found on the jogger, and whereas the New York State Supreme Court Judge Tejada, upon the motion of the 5 young men's attorneys, and with no objection from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who said the confessions did not hold water, vacated their convictions in December 2002, establishing the young men's total innocence in the Central Park jogger case. And whereas this Senate legislative body recognizes there can never be adequate compensation, for the damage suffered by the Central Park jogger, Tricia Maley, and whereas this legislative body further recognizes the young men who suffered through the tragedy of the Central Park jogger case and the catastrophic impact on their lives and stolen years deserve justice and healing. And whereas the important lessons learned from this case include protection of women's rights to be free from violence, the mistaken rush to prosecute the 5 teens left Matias Reyes free to murder a pregnant woman and attack several others for another 4 months before he was arrested during an attempted rape, protection of juvenile rights. The 5 were interrogated for many hours and not allowed to see their family members or their attorneys until after they had signed a, quote, confession. The need for videotape of interrogations, legislation which I have here in Albany and urge our governor to support and make sure that we pass. From videotape of interrogations from beginning to the end. Videotaping of confessions should begin from the point and time of arrest and include all interrogations up until arraignment. In this case, videotaping was used only after the youths had written, quote, and signed, quote, confessions, quote, which later events have proven to be completely false. Such prejudice in the criminal justice system makes a mockery of criminal laws, presumption of innocence, and the need for swift and adequate closure for victims of wrongful conviction. Now therefore be resolved that this legislative body pause in its deliberations to recognize the unspeakable harm suffered by Tricia Mealy and remember the wrongful convictions of the 5 innocent youths, Anton McCrae, Yusef Salam, Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, Corey Wise, in the 21st anniversary of the Central Park case, and be it further resolved that copies of this resolution be suitably engrossed, be transmitted to Tricia Mealy and the 5 innocent individuals and their families. We have a petition to pass the videotape criminal interrogations law I sponsor. The bill is New York State Senate Bill 1267, and the petition basically says, and we're asking all of you to sign it, and in the back will be my staff with a copy of the petition for you to sign, and it basically says, we the undersigned fully support videotaped interrogations law, New York State Senate Bill 1267, sponsored by Senator Bill Perkins. By the way, this law was already passed in Chicago before Obama became the President of the United States. In fact, this is he was my model even at that time before I supported him for president. And strongly encourages passage and enactment into law. The videotape interrogations law mandates that any statement made during a custodial police interrogation is inadmissible in a court of law unless the interrogation was electronically recorded as evidenced by the Central Park 5 and so many other youths and individuals of color wrongfully imprisoned based upon coerced confessions. New York State must require the videotaping of police interrogations to enforce the integrity of the criminal justice system and to ensure true justice and equality for all residents of New York State. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here, to share with you. And I want to say in conclusion and ask that you join me in saying they must be paid.
Thank you, Senator Perkins. They must be paid now. Amen.
Amen.
So, I am honored to introduce our panelists. Raymond Santana was one of the 5 children of color wrongfully convicted of rape and assault in the infamous case of the Central Park jogger. Raymond received a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison. In 2002, after a confession by the real perpetrator, the convictions of the Central Park 5 were overturned. Raymond is now suing, as we've heard, New York City for compensation due to his wrongful conviction and unjustifiable term of incarceration. He is also working to protect others from the injustices he endured. Roger Wareham is a lawyer and political activist of over 4 decades. He's a member of the December 12th movement, a human rights organization of African people that organizes in the Black and Latino community around human rights violations. He's also the International Secretary General of the International Association Against Torture, a non-governmental organization in consultative status before the United Nations. He earned his BA from Harvard University as a member of the first class graduating with a degree in African American Studies. He then earned his law degree from Columbia University Law School. Angelo Pinto of the Correctional Association of New York is the campaign manager for the Juvenile Justice Project's Raise the Age campaign. The campaign seeks to increase New York State's age of criminal responsibility and the practice of housing children in adult jails and prisons and ensure that children in the justice system receive appropriate rehabilitative services. He received a degree from the City University of New York Law School and a bachelor's in criminal justice and sociology from Clark Atlanta University. Finally, Lewis Webb Jr. is on the staff of the American Friends Service Committee, and he's also facilitator of the Campaign to End the New Jim Crow. He works to shift the criminal justice paradigm from one of punishment and retribution to one of healing and transformation. Lewis was the Dean of the School of Criminal Justice at ASA Institute. He has also served as a state prosecutor, attorney for the New York City Department of Corrections, and criminal law professor. He received his law degree from Brooklyn Law School and his BS and MA in philosophy from New York University. So thank you all for joining us. First question, and this is to everyone. The case of the Central Park Five actually encapsulates a very specific era in New York, but it's also timeless in so many ways. It's changed lives and influenced criminal justice practices and laws. So to each of you, what in your view or experience has been the most lasting impact of this case, for better or for worse?
Let me say just first that I wanted to say this before Senator Perkins left, but Senator Perkins is one of 2 or 3 elected officials in New York who have been with this case on the right side of this case from Jump Street. And with that, I would include Charles and Inez Barron, since she was elected. A lot of folks, now that the train seems to be moving in the right direction, are jumping on, but he needs to be commended for having the courage to take the position when it wasn't a popular position, when the convictions had not been overturned, when there was no documentary by a famous documentarian. He took the position around that they were innocent and fought for that. So I just wanted to say that too. The lasting effect of this case is a reflection of the institutional racism that is a part of U.S. history and continues to this day. The mindset that said that when a white woman is attacked, any black person will do as a perpetrator is the same mindset that creates stop and frisk, where blacks and Latinos are stopped and frisked in a wildly disproportionate manner in terms of our relationship to the population. So, in one sense, there has been no change. This case was the Scottsboro case of the latter part of the 20th century. And so we can see this going on and on because this society has never dealt with the issue, realistically, with the issue of race. So it's a continuation. So that the lasting impact, one of the impacts, I think, has been the motion to raise, the issue, the 2 pieces of legislation. One, I think, is Annette Robinson's legislation to raise the age for a juvenile to be treated as an adult from 16 to 18. And then the question of the videotape confessions. If we can get that, that will be some progress. It won't stop blacks and Latinos from being arrested disproportionately until that mindset has been there, but it will create some of the external conditions to at least come at the lies that allow the police to get away with what they got away with in this case. And to just put that in perspective, their convictions were overturned. How many people have seen the film, the documentary, Central Park 5? Those who haven't really need to go see it after this program, but their convictions were overturned after the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who had originally prosecuted them, did a thorough reinvestigation after the person who actually committed the crime came forward, and all of his forensics and stories matched all the holes that were in this case from the beginning, because there were no forensics that tied Raymond, who, Bill said he was 15 when he started. He was 14 years old when he was being interrogated by Manhattan veteran homicide investigators without his parents present. So they were all 14, 15, and Corey was 16. The police department has taken the position, after the Manhattan District Attorney's Office reinvestigated and overturned the conviction, District Attorney Morgenthau said, if we knew now what we knew, if we knew then what we knew now, not only would we have not prosecuted them, we would not even have indicted them. And for those familiar with the criminal justice system, a district attorney, like, as Sal, what's his name, said, the former, Wackler said, who was the former chief judge, the head of the Court of Appeals in New York, said, a district attorney can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich because they exercise so much control. So for Morgenthau to say we could not even have indicted them was a reflection of that there was no case. The case were the statements that they were convicted of. There were no forensics. There was no blood. Patricia Mealy had lost 75% of the blood in her body when they found her. She was in a muddy ravine, and there was nothing, absolutely no piece of evidence that tied them to that, aside from these statements which magically appeared after hours of interrogation by the New York City Police Department. After the convictions were overturned, the New York City Police Department's position to this day is that those confessions were legitimate, that they're guilty, and that the police department has done nothing wrong. And that's why in the civil litigation, which followed the overturning of the convictions, we were into the 10th year with the city not even having made an offer. So those are, sorry, briefly, some of the impacts. And we can deal with some others as we go on. Thank you.
I think the lasting impact for me is how we treat our children. In New York State, we treat our 16 and 17-year-old youth as adults. And I think that's clearly problematic for several reasons. And we also treat our 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds as adults as well for certain crimes. Watching the documentary and watching Corey Wise, who was the only 16-year-old at the time of the case. And Corey Wise, of course, ends up getting 11 years. Right? And Corey Wise also ends up spending time in Rikers Island during the course of this trial. Right? So Corey Wise is shuffling back and forth between Rikers Island during the time of his trial. And I think we don't think about how much these things, or this case, traumatizes youth and the practices. And that's the importance of really shifting and transforming legislation. And while raising the age for all youth and all crimes is very important. But I think the other thing that is tremendously important is the impact on families. The documentary illustrates so clearly, families breaking down after verdicts being read. And imagine 10 years, 15 years after that, the impact lingers on. And of course, the community suffers from that, right? Because there's a whole culture built around these youth are dangerous. And we're not just talking about the Central Park 5, we're talking about black youth all over the city, and all over the state, all over the country. That's why legislation like this is able to exist. And unfortunately, the documentary depicts as well that oftentimes in the community we buy into it as well. Right? The media sensationalism allows us to buy into it. And now I think with the documentary and the case, it's a great opportunity for us to leverage this momentum to say we must change the law that exists the way it does today. And if we don't do that, I think we lose a historical moment, and the travesty that took place is for naught as well.
For me, the real impact of the case is 2.4 million people in prison. This case it's not coincidental that this case happened in 1989, 1990. And the 1990s was the period of time in which we tripled the number of people that were in prisons in the United States. Coincidence? I don't think so. What else happened around this case? 1995, 4 years after the conviction, Governor Pataki introduces and signs what bill? Death penalty. Coincidence? Don't think so. 1991, legislation was introduced and passed that did what? Lowered the age of responsibility for young people. In 1991, if you were 16, you could be charged as an adult. Coincidence? I don't think so. 1995, Sentence Reform Act. Tripled the amount of time people spent in prison. Coincidence? No. This case has resulted in the mass incarceration of people of color. And I think Raymond should get the last word if he would.
First off, thank everybody for coming out. It's definitely an honor to be here today. I haven't been here in about 3 years, so it's good to be back and see the faces and people who I haven't seen in a long time. And for me, one of the lasting impacts is how we went through this process. We're talking over 20 years, and they didn't think that we were going to survive prison. That was number one, but we did. And then after that, they didn't think that we was going to survive in society because we was given a social death. This wasn't just a 5 to 10 year sentence. This was a social death. We were not supposed to survive after we came home from prison, and we did. And you know, we went through numerous obstacles. We had to register sex offenders, and we had curfews at that time because we was on parole. If you see the film, I wound up going back to prison because of that. Because I couldn't function. I hit rock bottom and there was no transitional programs for us. We didn't get no benefits. We didn't get no handouts. All we was put back out society, and we were supposed to adapt and function as regular people. And so, you know, to go through all that and then to finally get exonerated and to receive, you know, page 15, you know, of the exoneration, which means that they try to hide it. And, you know, if you go on inmate lookup, we're wiped off like it never happened, like we don't exist. So it's to not get the acknowledgement that a wrong was committed, that an injustice was committed, and to go now and to fight this civil suit for 10 years, you know, it's unheard of. You know, where you know, law department can take this stance and say that we're still guilty, you know, even though there was no DNA evidence, and how they can just be so arrogant. You know, but meanwhile, you know, they're milking the city for millions of dollars. You know, but we can't get justice. And so, you know, when the film came out, it was a blessing for us in disguise. You know, because the film was able to give you guys, the viewers, you know, an inside look and to see us not as rapists, not as a wolf pack, you know, not as urban terrorists, but as human beings, as kids, you know, who had to grow up in the system and who overcame adversity and numerous obstacles. And we were able to transform the label of the Central Park 5 into something more positive. You know, when we go out now, we speak to kids and you know, we travel all across the country now, you know, and it has taken a whole, this whole movement has begun to grow legs, and it's definitely grateful, you know, to see you guys and to feel the love, because it's definitely healing for us, because we didn't have that either. You know, we went through a lot of situations with our family. My mom passed away from cancer when I was in prison. You know, Corey lost his father. You know, Yusuf Salam still has his mother, but she's battling stage 4 cancer. And so, you know, it's just the arrogance from the city. You know, when you can go out and you can speak to all these politicians and you can receive the support from, you know, the city council and the state senate and you know, the top 4 male candidates, but still get no recognition. You know, still get no recognition of what's going on and what happened to us. So it becomes very frustrating. And so, like Roger always says, you know, the war is won with the people. And so this is what we do. We come out to you guys and we ask you for support. You know, and for me, that's the lasting part, that even though we have overcome all these obstacles and we get to the end, we still cannot take that last step forward. You know, because the city still maintains a position. And as long as they maintain that position, that scar that they gave us will never heal properly. It will always be like a scab that's being picked on. And so that's what it is for us at the end of the day.
I'd just like to keep it with you, Raymond, just for a while longer, because so many of our Black and Latino children spend their teenage years incarcerated. So talk to us about how doing that, how going through that changes the arc of your life, changes your journey, what in very personal ways.
Well, you know, for me, because I had my dad, and so me going to prison at the age of 14, I lost the opportunity for him to pass down his morals and his values. You know, I always say that your father and your mother's the first role model you come across. These are people who give you your lessons in life. They teach you everything you need to know to become productive, and that was stolen from me. And so in the process, I had to grow up in the system. The system now gave me these values and these morals. You know, they told me what to do. They told me what time to get up. And I became institutionalized. And what happened was when I came back out, you know, 7 years later, I didn't know how to function. I had all these physical effects that I brought, mental, that I brought with me, and I didn't know. I didn't understand it, so people pointed out. I was very aggressive, and I loved to stay in my room because it was the size of a cell. If I was in the room, I can give you eye-to-eye contact, but I'm scouring the room because those are characteristics of a person that's been in prison. And so that was my life. I didn't know how to function. I filled out numerous job applications, and when you got to tell them that you're convicted of a felony, if they ask and you got to say it's a rape charge, you already know you're out the door. But if you get by that one, and he says, you know what, I'm gonna hire you, even though you got a rape charge, but what was you in jail for? And you say the Central Park jogger, it's over, and so that's what I had to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So beyond the experience, the stigma.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody else want to give thoughts on that? Or okay, so I'll move on. We've heard from Senator Perkins about his bill that would require videotaping in their entirety of interrogations. And Senator Montgomery has also introduced a bill, and that would raise the age of adult criminal responsibility from 16 to 18. And we also, Governor Cuomo says that he's going to press the Assembly and the Senate this year to address two of the biggest causes of wrongful convictions: false confessions and witness misidentification. But my question is what new creative steps can average citizens take to move the dial, to change this story, to make sure that it won't happen again? What can we do that might transform injustice?
I firmly believe that the real catalyst for justice and social change always comes from the people, like the people in this room. That the legal history of the United States, particularly in terms of what's considered the civil rights movement, the catalyst for that were people in the streets, which then filtered its way up through the legislature or into the judicial system. So in the particular of this case, even in 1989, when the trial was going on, people were out in the streets supporting them. It didn't save them because the tidal wave of racism at that time, in terms of all aspects of the media, and I think somebody alluded to the media, particularly Donald Trump, who took out full-page ads in all of I think there were like 5 daily newspapers in New York City at that time. He took out full-page ads in all of them, basically calling for the death penalty, which the point Lewis made is that was the catalyst for leading to that. So in 2002, when we put in the motion to vacate the convictions, every time we were in court, people were in court. When we came out of court, we had press conferences, we had rallies, and that created a climate, along with just a factual basis of innocence, that led to the overturning of the convictions. With the civil suit, once again, it's important that people come to court. Those of you who are in the New York City area or in the near vicinity, they're in court again this Tuesday, 2 o'clock, Federal District Court, downtown Manhattan. Come there, see what's happening, be there. For a few times, there weren't a lot of people in court, then people started coming so much so that when the judge came out one time, he looked around and said, is something happening here that I didn't know about? It has an effect in terms of the judicial system knowing that people are concerned. So it's good to see the movie, but it's more important to come out and bring somebody with you to the court dates, to the demonstrations that follow. And those are the sort of things that I think begin to make the type of legislation we're talking about more palatable to the powers that be, because they understand the ramifications and the possible effect on their political career as far as votes.
Incarcerated. Those are great places to start for you to recognize these are places where I can make a shift, or places where I can be a part of advocacy around the issue. But I think there needs to be a tremendous amount of groundswell around these issues. It has to become part of the regular conversation for folks, the issues of juvenile justice and what took place with the Central Park 5. I think when you think about the media attention that was happening when this case was happening, I mean, it was in the New York Times. And these issues now aren't being covered like that. And a lot of the reason it's not being covered like that is because the community is not involved in the way we were involved before. And I think we also have to then push the media to get involved in these issues. That's what the community groundswell does. It causes the media to say, this is something we have to pay attention to. And then, of course, legislators and everyone else will follow suit. So.
When I think about the Central Park 5 case, I seem to focus regularly on the police conduct. it seems to me that none of this would have led to where we are today but for that level of misconduct. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to get our tail from between our legs. No longer can we talk to our kids about honor the police, respect the police. We have to be a buffer for our kids between them and the police now. The police are no longer the guy in the corner who's looking out for you. The police now are the guy in the corner who's looking out for you, not to protect you, but to arrest you. And we have to talk to our kids that way now. And we also have to talk to our legislators. I mean, I identified a few things that happened that I believe were directly related to the case. I didn't talk about one, and that is the NYPD's effort to start, was it CompStat and what was the other one? Broken windows policing. Okay? I believe directly related. What were those? Those were efforts to focus on Black and Latino young people. It wasn't about crime. It was about another mechanism to round up our people. So I think that as we look at our legislators, we have to not just encourage them to support us, but dare them not to support us. We have to change the dialogue. And it's about standing up for who you know you are. We've got to protect our children. You know, as a prosecutor, it used to be not funny, but it used to be interesting how I would sit in courtrooms or talk to parents during interrogations, and they would say, well, just tell them the truth. You can talk to them. It's okay. Just tell them what happened. You'll get to go home. We can't do that anymore. As parents, we must walk into those presets and say, stop talking to my child. Just, I don't care what he did. Stop talking to him. I will deal with him the way that I do. It's not your role. Okay? I have a 17 and a 16-year-old son. And my wife and I are a little different when it comes to these issues. We get a call from the school, kid's not doing what he's supposed to do. Immediately, his mom says, wait till he gets home. Automatically, the challenge is to the child. We've got to change that. We've got to challenge not the children, but the people who are claiming that our children are doing wrong. We've got to get our tail from between our legs and exercise the power that we have as parents and as New Yorkers. So that's what I think we can do.
As a people, we got to hold our politicians responsible, and we got to hold the police department responsible, because we're the taxpayers. And this is our money that's being used for their jobs and our votes. And I think that it's very important. I think that we have to recognize that as a people. And once we recognize that, we start demanding some answers, and we got to just hold them accountable.
Thank you. Yeah. And I would just add one thing in terms of things that we can all do. I think we need to start seeing ourselves as the media. Everything has changed with social media. We don't have to wait for the New York Times. We don't have to wait for the Daily News. I was a journalist for the New York Times for 31 years, and I know how things have changed. We have the power. So one creative thing we can do is pick up that smartphone. Start telling our stories. Start telling other people's stories. Start challenging the system in very creative ways. I think Jazz is sitting there. That's something he's been doing for some time now. We have the power. So now I'll open it up.
When a policeman becomes a policeman, he's told, he goes to school, the training that teach him what he's supposed to do and the powers that he does have as a policeman. He's expected to do only that. So now if I commit a crime and the police arrest me for going through a red light, now he's supposed to just arrest me, not beat me up. And if he beats me up, he's gone further than he's supposed to, as far as I know. Now, he's wrong. Can't he be sued? What I'm trying to say is, if the policeman who wrongfully mistreat us, if the cop himself knew that he too can be sued, not just the city, we always sue the city. Let's consider the policeman also. If he knew that he too had something to lose in a case like this, I think many of them would think twice before they beat my head or do something tragic like these boys.
Well, let's ask our legal experts here.
No, I think you're right. And I think you should propose that to whoever your elected representative is in terms of changing this question of liability, because the city is actually what picks up the bill for the police officers who committed the crimes, unless it's a situation so egregious that they decide they're not going to represent them. But you should make that, talk to whoever your elected representative, because I think the point is these ideas have to be translated in legislation. Our elected officials too many times dance away from it or pay lip service, but there are a lot of elections coming up this year and the next 2 years. We need to make that an election issue, just like the Central Park 5 needs to be an issue that anyone who's seeking office needs to speak to.
I want to not directly respond, but I noticed in the audience we have Ken Thompson, who is, if I remember correctly, prosecuted police officers, and particularly the case of Adna Louima. And so I would like, if he would not mind, to speak to that question in particular. Would you mind?
What I would say is, I was a federal prosecutor in Brooklyn for a number of years, and this case, what happened to these young men, it cries out, this is an injustice that has to be dealt with. And we can't look at this as just a regular newspaper article and we just turn to the next page. We can't shrug our shoulders. Angelo Pinto's absolutely right. We have to speak. Roger Wareham is absolutely right. The people will be the catalyst. Because when I was in the U.S. Attorney's office and Louima came through the door, 8,000 people marched over the Brooklyn Bridge. We heard them. Some had plungers. That made a difference. We can't only hold the police responsible. We must also hold the prosecutors responsible. Because the police make the arrests on the street, but the prosecutors are the ones to look at a case and determine whether this is a case that should proceed. And if we don't become aware and become engaged, we're going to have more egregious acts of injustice. Today in the papers, there's a young brother in Brooklyn, Jabbar Collins, who it's reported was in prison for 15 years for a murder he didn't commit by the Brooklyn DA's office. Are people going to pay attention to that case? That case is scheduled to go to trial in April. And I have another case currently, a young African-American young lady from Brooklyn named Ramona Moore. I'm not sure any of you I know you remember her, Councilman Barron. But how many of you others remember that name? Ramona Moore came home one night, 21 years old, college student at Hunter, told her mother, I'm going down the street to see a friend. She never returned. Her mother called the police the next day and said, my daughter didn't come back. The police took the report, went back to the precinct and closed that case immediately. The mother called the precinct, went to the precinct, begged for help for days. The police did not look for her daughter. But 30 days earlier, a white doctor's wife on the Upper East Side went missing when she went to walk her dog. This is all documented. The NYPD had dozens of detectives look for that particular woman. They brought the bloodhound out within hours. They had a press conference, the police commissioner. They blanketed the Upper East Side. Why didn't they do the same for Ramona Moore? And guess what? Ramona Moore was being held in a basement apartment 2 blocks from my house, being raped and tortured for days. And even the guys who did it was watching New York One. They couldn't believe there was no publicity. And so now that case is in federal court in Brooklyn, and I'm handling that case. The point I'm making to you is this. We can't give Raymond Santana and other people back the years that were stolen. But at least we can say never again was a prosecutor. But I also speak to you as someone who believes in fundamental fairness and justice. Adna Louima got justice. I did the opening statement, and I held those cops accountable for what they did to him. But I also, when I got out of the U.S. Attorney's office, stood up for Emmett Till, the beautiful 14-year-old boy from Chicago who went to Money, Mississippi in 1955 and got murdered because he whistled at a white woman. He paid for that act with his life. And that was one of the greatest injustices and tragedies that we ever had. But guess what? There was no convictions in that case. And I stood and pressured the Department of Justice to reopen that murder investigation. Years later, I wasn't born when Emmett Till was murdered, but I think that we have to stand up. And we got DOJ to reopen that case because there were still people alive walking around Mississippi, maybe in their 80s, but they had participated, we believed, in the murder of Emmett Till. And they were never held accountable. And I stood with Senator Schumer, we pressured DOJ to open that case. All I'm saying is this, we can have panel after panel. But if we don't stand up and speak, now look, I'm telling you, look at not only the police, but the prosecutors. They're supposed to be there to be a stopgap to make sure that an injustice doesn't occur. We have to. This case has to be talked about. We have to tell everyone we know. Do you know what happened in Central Park?
You know, I think what you're also saying is to hold ourselves accountable, to hold ourselves accountable.
I'm telling you,
We have
I
to do
used to be a prosecutor, and if you don't, we heard the marchers. That makes a difference. There was a line to get into the Avenue Louima trial. And so you got to pay attention.
My name is John Graham, Executive Director of Manhattan Educational Opportunity Center. How we move forward. If you want to learn the disposition of how police behave, we need a manuscript on how police do what they do. Exactly. If we don't have the manuscript, in other words, we need to educate our young children, brothers and sisters, about how we need to, how police, how they're oriented. What is their orientation? Unless we have an orientation or a manuscript of how police behave, we're going to constantly be looking inside the police station.
Hi, my name is Eddie Rosario. I'm from the Correctional Association. I feel compelled to speak because I just attended a different panel in which they were talking about the new Gun Safe Act. I forget the exact name of that. And what I see here, what I think is a repetition of what happened to Mr. Santana and a lot of our children in our communities, is that we react to these moral panics as a society, and then we look for the scapegoat. And for too long, that scapegoat has had the face of a young person of color. And today, they're passing a gun law, and they made a new law where they're going to reenact the same kinds of, they're going to be able to concentrate on communities of color, where they'll be able to sanction young children who are even near a gun or even think that they're even part of a gang, and then do like 6 to 15 years off the top. They're giving what they call in the vernacular football number. We need not just to get up and march. We need not to just go to panels. We need to change the discussion. We need to change the frame of the discussion, because punishment, the way we create in this society, doesn't work. But you know why? This gun laws thing is going to happen, and we're going to put more and more young people in prison that don't deserve to be in prison.
I am a mother. I live in Brooklyn. I have 8 children, and my youngest is a boy, and he is 12. And you know, having 8 girls in the beginning, I didn't have this overwhelming fear when he was born, even though I was happy to have a boy. But the overwhelming fear that swept over me of, when will he have his first opportunity of getting pulled over by a police officer? You know, when will somebody challenge him just because of the color of his skin and just because he's a boy? And because I want him to be proud, I want him to be strong, I want him to be able to speak out and be in a respectful way. But I think to this gentleman's point, he must know the truth. And just like I tell my girls, you got to know the truth. When do we change the conversation? When will his first experience be with being stopped and frisked? Or when will his first experience be with being pulled off the train? And as he's getting 12 and he's looking me in my eye, it's getting worse and worse. I mean, he has a father who tries to explain things to him and talks to him. I don't think he really gets the magnitude. I don't think you do until you get that first pull over or whatever of what's out there for him. But I don't want to put this stuff on him, but I also want to be honest enough to share with him. I think I owe him that as his mother, to share the truth. So what?
I think you know the answer already. When let's say you're, God forbid, you're 12-year-old, any of your daughters came home and said, "Mom, the teacher touched me in the wrong way," would you know how to respond? It's the same response if your kid comes home and says, "The police pulled me over." You know, it's no longer, well, what were you doing? Where were you? Who were you with? Were you making a lot of noise? We can't have that conversation with our kids any longer. They come home and say, "I got stopped." What was the police officer's badge number? What precinct was it in? Let's go and talk to them. We can't bow down to the system any longer. The system is not built for us, guys. It's built against us. And if we don't stop it, why would they? For me, it's really nothing new. We just have to apply what we already do to the system. We have to.
Very, very quickly. One, it was either the NYCLU or the ACLU did do a manual in terms of what to do when stopped by the police, which has some very good information, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel on that. Secondly, we have to tell, I remember when my son was a teenager, I told him from the time he was 11 or 12, I told him, look, as a young black man, you're walking around with a target on your back as far as the society is concerned. That it's unfair, but from the time he was born, when kids say, that's not fair, I said, life isn't fair. But that you have to understand that that's how the society deals with you, so that the things that you do, or if you have some white friends, they're going to be dealt with differently than you're going to be dealt with. And around 17, that happened with him one time. He was sitting over by Central Park, of all places, with some white kid he went to school with. He was drinking beer. He was drinking beer. Guess who got arrested? So when I had to go to the central booking to get him out, I didn't want to say I told you so, but you got to tell them the truth. What we can do as a community, and as an organization, December 12th, we always took the position: when the police stop somebody, don't just walk by, go over there. And we used to say, shout loud and draw a crowd, because when the police are making a stop that they know is BS, and a lot of people come around, they're going to back off. But if everybody just sort of walks along like, well, it isn't me, it's not my son, then that allows them to do that. We had an incident, we have a place in Brooklyn called Sister's Place. We had an incident around 8 months ago where the police pulled over these three young brothers, they were driving a really nice car, pulled them over, ran them through the license plate, there was nothing. But a lot of people came out, and then they let them go. Then they bounced back and arrested the people who were watching. But even they arrested the five. We went to the precinct. They gave them summonses, and before their court date, they were all thrown out. So now they're facing a civil suit for false arrest. But the fact is that people, we've got to be active in it. We can't. It's not somebody else. The first person, like Michael Jackson said, look in the mirror. You got to be active around it, not somebody else. Somebody else, yes, but it's got to be. You have to be that example. I would also say that we have to get back to the definition of family that we once had, which was that family is a community. It's not necessarily your biological family.
My name is Lady Benjamin. I'm a graduate student at Brooklyn College, and I just want to go back to this whole thing about accountability. And just like what a lot of people said here, we do have to get out and be involved. It has to be a grassroots initiative. I had to step out of the box to even be, this is my first time in Albany, and I have to step out of the box to even be exposed to things like this. My friends back home are not interested in this at all. It's like, you're not going to find, a lot of us minorities, we're not in school, we're not in college, especially a lot of black men aren't in college. We have to start in the community, the corner store, the liquor store, the clubs, things like that. Like, it's not gonna come from here. It's not gonna come from these events because we're not here. The problem and the people that is being affected by aren't in these rooms. They're not. It's a generation gap. How many people are here are millennials? I'm in this room and I'm surrounded by people my parents' age, and it's like there's a gap, and it has to be. We need more mentors, and I wouldn't. If I didn't have that foundation, a lot of people don't have that foundation, like I have to be here. And they're not going to be here. So mentors and people and public advocates, you guys have to come down to the hood and come to where we are. Go to the parole office, go to the probation office, and pull these guys to the side because they're misinformed and they don't see the bigger picture.
Yes. My name is Evangeline Byers. I'm from Meg Evers College, and I'm one of the student leaders. And one of the things that being on Meg Evers College has reunited in me is this whole thing of movement, and especially student movements and social movements. Like the young lady is saying, a lot of young people are not getting involved. But back to what the ex-prosecutor said, nothing is going to happen if the people don't move. And one of the things that I see is a complacency amongst our people of victimization. And it's not their fault, because if you're constantly abused, after a while you get, like a battered woman syndrome, to where you withdraw and you feel helpless. And one of the things that I've learned is that when you open up your mouth and you start to speak something, truth does not need a defense. As long as what you're saying is true, even if nobody wants to hear it at the moment, if you keep pushing ahead and forging ahead, you make headway. And I think the idea that he said 8,000 people marched across that bridge, and they heard and saw that plunger. So therefore, something had to take place. This situation of the Central Park 5 is the same type of thing. If we all show up in the courtroom, if we all make noise, not only will they get their due, but this will also prevent the next case from happening. And we have brothers and sons and children coming up, and they are the next Central Park 5. And this mother's tears, it's not she had girls, she didn't have to worry so much, but that's even becoming something that's a problem. So I think going forward, if we don't begin to become more vigilant, and if we don't begin to start to move, then we're going to lose more of our, we have millions of black men incarcerated.
That's right.
Like, this is something that we're talking about as if it's a passive thing, but this is something that's very, very serious. This affects our ability to remain as a people, to be able to produce and go forward. So going forward, if we don't reach back into our communities and deal with all of the issues that go together and move as a unit, when one person calls, we go. You know, I have this thing that you cannot tell me that we can't win. The battle's already won in your mind. You decide whether you win or lose. And I think that if we don't begin to start moving as a people again, that we're going to lose across the board. There is a war on African American. Now that they see Hispanics are beginning to take the root, watch what they do. They're not going to let that happen. So if we don't look, they're looking at that, they're trying to shape things to see what they can do now to begin to even stop that move. So the white supremacist power structure is not trying to give up power. So I think that it's very, very important that we begin to unify, to take this stuff very seriously and move ahead. Because your sons are next.
Thank you so much.